Hi everyone! Welcome back to another planetarium live stream. My name is Jessica. I am the planetarium director, and I have two of my students with me here today, and I will let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Eli, since he is to my left.
Hi, my name's Eli. I'm a physics and astronomy student at UMD.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
So tonight we've got a great presentation led by Lindsay all about the amazing women who helped launch us into space. Before we switch to that, sorry, my cat Nova has decided to come say hi, but she's being a little shy, so she's just bumping into me instead of being on camera. Anyway, while we're going throughout the presentation, if you have any questions for us, leave them in the comments. Eli and I will be watching those, and we'll answer them as soon as we can. If we don't get to it right away, we will take some time at the end to answer those questions that we missed. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay.
All right, so we are going to be talking about all sorts of women that have contributed to spaceflight and that you probably have never heard of before, most of them. Okay, so first we are going to look at some women who are working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You may have heard about the Jet Propulsion Laboratory before. It's commonly just referred to as JPL. And now it's a part of NASA, but at this time when it first started in about 1939, NASA didn't exist yet. So Jet Propulsion Laboratory was kind of its own little organization. So these are all of the women who worked at JPL at this time during like World War II and a little bit after that. You can see they are all women. And some of these women had math degrees so that, you know, to do the calculations, they knew how to do those, but not all of them. And they would do their calculations on paper, which is super crazy, calculations for figuring out rocket thrust and figuring out rocket trajectories, figuring out the type of fuel that is needed and how much of that fuel would be needed for different rockets. And so the male engineers would come up with these ideas for the different types of rockets, and then the women would do all of these calculations on paper to see if those ideas could actually work. And they put in all this work to figure out the trajectories and things like that, and they couldn't actually go to watch any of the rocket launches, unfortunately. So when the US wanted to try to get to outer space, there were kind of two different organizations that were competing. One of them was JPL, and the other one was the US Navy. Because during World War II, JPL, the rockets that they were working on were mostly used for weapons. So because of that background, the US government wanted to use the Navy to build a rocket to go to outer space. That was the Jupiter C rocket. The idea that JPL had for a rocket was called the Vanguard project. The Jupiter C rocket, when it was built and finally went into testing, it actually exploded. Luckily, JPL was kind of building the Vanguard rocket on the down low without letting anybody know. And so they were ready to go to space when the Jupiter C rocket didn't quite make it. So Macy Roberts, she's right over here. She was the kind of manager of all of the human computers for many years. And part of the reason that she ended up with all women as in her human computing group, is that she was a little unsure how a man would have or take having a female manager. So not really wanted to take management or take roles from them. So also there were all of the women kind of were like a family and got along really well. So even if there was a woman that got hired that didn't really fit into that family, then they didn't work out. Okay, so Barbara Paulson is right over here. She is getting her 25-year anniversary pin for JPL in that picture. And she ended up working at JPL for 45 years. She worked on the Mariner probe that went to Venus and Mercury. And she helped, back before they were sending rockets into outer space, she helped with the creation of one of the first rocket missiles that they created at JPL. Janez Lawson is right over here. She was the first Black person and first woman to be in her engineering school that she went to. She actually got a degree in chemical engineering, but she couldn't actually be an official engineer at NASA because only men could be engineers at, or sorry, JPL, because only men could be engineers at JPL. And so she ended up coming to JPL to be a human computer instead of an engineer. All right, Sylvia Lundy. One of her most significant accomplishments were the trajectories for the Voyager spacecraft. So there were two of them. So we have Voyager 1 coming by Jupiter and then Saturn, and then going out into the outer solar system. And then Voyager 2 hit Jupiter, went by Saturn, also went on to Uranus and Neptune. So at each planet, so all the planets have, a gravitational pull. So as the spacecraft approaches each planet, that gravitational pull of the planet kind of affects the trajectory of the probe. So you have to approach Jupiter at a particular angle and speed so that its gravitational pull will then send you off to Saturn and then out into the outer solar system. But Voyager 2, they needed a trajectory and speed to get slung past Jupiter to Saturn, and then also get sent from Saturn on the path to rendezvous with Uranus and then on to Neptune. So a lot of calculations had to go into these trajectories and speeds that they needed at all of these different planets. And so she was the one that figured out the trajectories and the speeds and all of that.
And again, doing all of this by hand. No computers.
Sue Finley, she actually has been working at NASA for 60 years. She's still there. She's 81. And she started out as a human computer, but eventually she became one of the higher ups at NASA when JPL joined in with NASA. And her favorite mission was Venera, which was a probe that went to Venus and landed on the surface of Venus. The most recent mission that she worked on was the Juno mission that is currently orbiting around Jupiter, taking data and pictures for Jupiter. So next we have the Mercury 13. So these were women back during the kind of Mercury era of spaceflight. So this was before any astronauts had gone into space. So the Mercury program was trying to get astronauts up into space. And there were all men that were selected to be astronauts for the Mercury program. Well, there was this man who decided that, well, women could be astronauts also, and so they went through all of the same testing and everything that the males went through, but ultimately, unfortunately, they were not allowed to become astronauts, and this video explains that a little bit more.
While the Americans were recruiting astronauts, the Soviets continued to rack up firsts in space. In 1963, they launched Valentina Tereshkova, their first female cosmonaut. She flew 48 orbits. At the Lovelace Clinic in New Mexico, a top-secret program was underway to recruit a corps of female astronauts. They were dubbed the Mercury 13.
Well, they did extraordinarily well in the tests, and they surpassed the men in some ways. And that was a function of their different body type. And they wound up with 20 or so ladies that were all suitable candidates. And of those 20 or 24 that took the tests, 13 were found to be adequate and appropriate candidates for the space program. It didn't happen because they were 20 years ahead of their time. The program never received any kind of encouragement from NASA. In fact, active steps were taken to quash it. And so the ladies who had been given tremendous stimulation, and they were all very excited about being astronauts, and everybody at Lovelace thought they were going to be astronauts, were suddenly told that they couldn't be.
Jerry Cobb and her team were ready and eager to fly when the program was suddenly halted. No explanation was ever given to them, although the orders apparently came from the highest level.
I've seen the copy of a memo from Vice President Lyndon Johnson in which he was requiring James Webb to look into the suitability of women as candidates for space. And in Lyndon Johnson's handwriting across the bottom, instead of a signature, was the phrase, "Let's put a stop to this now." And that apparently was the death knell of the Mercury 13's aspirations to go into space. Most of them never knew about this till years later, but they never gave up. To this day, they still are looking for a ride. They want to go in space.
There's no difference in capability of pilots, whether women or men. But the problem was there were no women with experience in research and development. So you pick the guys with experience in research and development, and that's just a smart way of doing it.
Valentina Tereshkova would be the last woman in space until Sally Ride boarded an American space shuttle 2 decades later. By the end of 1963, the total number of astronauts had risen to 30. They'd all be vying for the 20 available seats on Gemini.
So one of the men in that video talked about how they ended up picking men who had a background in research and development as astronauts. So part of why there wasn't any women that qualified for that is because in the military, no women were allowed to hold those positions of testing and researching things in the military. And so since the military only allowed men to have those positions, only the men could become the astronauts at this time. But there were a lot of women behind the scenes at NASA at this time. So if you've seen the Hidden Figures movie, you will be familiar with these names. We have Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson that all worked at NASA at this time. They all also started out as human computers at NASA, doing calculations on paper and pencil. Dorothy Vaughan was kind of the supervisor of the West Area Computing Group. That was a group of specifically African American computers. Eventually, she saw that they were bringing in mechanical computers that could potentially replace herself and all of the women that worked for her. And so she taught herself how to use these new machine computers and became the expert at NASA in using these new machine computers. Katherine Johnson, she worked on calculating trajectories for the Mercury space flights, and one of those space flights that she worked on put Alan Shepard, the first American, into space, and John Glenn, the first American, into orbit. In fact, they were so confident in her abilities to do these solve these math problems on paper that when they did get the machine computers and the machine gave them information about the trajectory that they should have, they actually had Katherine Johnson double check the machine computer's work to make sure that it was actually calculating things correctly. And then Mary Jackson, she ended up being NASA's first Black female engineer. Before that, again, she was just in a human computer in the mathematics area, and she ended up being the first woman and first Black person at where she learned engineering, just like Janez Lawson. And eventually she became one of the top engineers at NASA before she retired. So Katherine Johnson got a Congressional Medal of Honor, and she also now has a building at NASA named after her. And just a few weeks ago, Mary Jackson got a building named after her also. This is the NASA headquarters building in Washington, D.C. That is now the Mary Jackson building. Margaret Hamilton is another woman that was behind the scenes. She was working with the computer systems that were going to be on the spacecraft, and she has a very cute story about how she helped save the Apollo landing. And so I'm gonna have you watch this video with her talking.
They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. And I just thought, wow, I've got to go there. I grew up in the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Upper Peninsula. I just enjoyed school, but there was something about math that I just liked more than everything else. I liked deriving the answers because I didn't want to memorize. It was too much. I was lazy. When my husband was in law school, they wanted, the law was, my being one of them, to pour tea. And I said to my husband, no way am I pouring tea. As a Harvard law wife, if I go to Harvard Law School, fine, I'll do what the men do, but I'm not going to be put in that position. And he was very proud of me that I had taken that stand. They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. I was the first programmer they hired. I came up with the term software engineering, and it was considered a joke. What? Software is engineering? Mostly men were working there, and they had somebody at home to take care of their kids. I had no choice. I'd bring my daughter, Lauren, into work nights and weekends, and she'd see me playing astronaut to test the software and doing the kinds of things the astronaut would do. So she wanted to do it too, so she played astronaut. And all of a sudden, everything came crashing on the simulator. And I realized that what she had done is that she selected the pre-launch program during flight. I said, oh my God, this is not good. We really need to put a protection in there because the astronaut really could do what she did by mistake. I tried to get it through MIT, NASA. No, they said, astronauts are trained never to make a mistake. There was an emergency. Everything happened that we thought would happen if they made the mistake. So then there was a decision, go, no go, land or don't land. Fortunately, the people at Mission Control trusted our software and they said, go, go, go. The software and the hardware worked perfectly. The software was on the ground and on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Her example speaks of the American spirit of discovery that exists in every little girl and little boy who know that somehow to look beyond the heavens is to look deep within ourselves.
Being fearless, even when the experts say, no, it doesn't make sense. They didn't believe it. Nobody did. It was something that we were dreaming of happening, but it became real.
I've seen that video I don't know how many times at this point, and I still get chills.
Yeah, me too. I love Margaret Hamilton. Yeah. Another woman that I love that I learned about creating the show is Joanne Morgan. She also worked behind the scenes for the Apollo programs. She was the only woman allowed in mission control during Apollo 11. That's her right there in the midst of all of these other men. But she actually, before she worked at NASA, she worked with a guy named Warner von Braun, and he was kind of the father of rocketry. And he was in the US trying to help us figure out how rockets worked and how we could get into space. And she worked with him, and he thought that she was a very, very good engineer. And so when NASA was getting started, he suggested that she should be a part of that. And so she was, for this Apollo 11 launch, she was the instrumentation controller. And she actually wasn't allowed, even though she worked on missions before Apollo 11, she wasn't allowed to be in the mission control room until Apollo 11 because she was a woman. And she would be walking around, NASA, and a lot of the men wouldn't believe that she was an engineer. She would also get calls kind of criticizing her and saying crude things about women that she had to deal with. Luckily, she had a really great manager at NASA, though, that supported her and got the men to kind of stop doing that to her. Another woman, Poppy Northcutt. She was also working on the Apollo program. She was actually the only woman in the mission control room during the Apollo 8 launch. And her mathematical calculations helped bring Apollo astronauts back home safely after circling the moon. So she worked on getting the astronauts back on the moon, or from the moon, and the calculations for that. Ethel Heineke Bauer. She also worked on trajectories for the Apollo missions. If you are older like me, sorry, you might know the Apollo 13 movie. Anyway, Apollo 13 had some things happen to the capsule during the launch of Apollo 13. And so they weren't able to actually land on the moon and instead had to just go around the moon and come right back to Earth. So she helped figure out what the trajectory should be for Apollo 13 so that Apollo 13 astronauts could return home safely. Margaret Brennicke was the first female welding engineer at NASA, and she worked with aluminum alloys and helped make decisions about what would be the materials that would be used for the Saturn V rockets. Barbara Johnson was an aeronautical engineer. The part of the flight trajectory that she worked on was when the spacecraft would get back to Earth and then start to enter through the atmosphere. She worked on the atmosphere trajectory. She also helped create some of the new computer systems called the entry monitor system. Billy Robertson, she also helped create some of the first computer models for launches, and she wrote the manuals explaining how to use new computer systems, and she did this for all of the Apollo launches. Judy Sullivan, she was a biomedical engineer, and she helped create the sensors and things that would track the astronauts' kind of health data, the sensors that were in the spacesuits. And so she was allowed to be in that particular control room. So there was that big mission control room for Apollo. There was a separate mission or control room for the biomedical sensors and things like that. So she was able to monitor that during the launches. So you saw in the video earlier with the Mercury 13 that America definitely did not put the first female into space. That was actually Valentina Tereshkova in 1963. To this day, she is still the youngest woman that has been in space at 26, and she is still the only woman to make a solo space flight. She was in the Soviet Union. And then also, before we sent any females into space, Svetlana Savitskaya went into space in 1982. She was the first woman on a space station and the first woman to do a spacewalk and the first woman to do 2 space flights. So now for some American female astronaut achievements. We have Sally Ride, the first American woman in space in 1983. Catherine D. Sullivan was the first American woman to do a spacewalk in 1984. Shannon Lucid was the first Chinese-born woman in space, and the first woman to do at least 3 space flights. Millie Hughes Fulford was the first female payload specialist in 1991. Eileen Collins was the first female space shuttle commander in 1999. Peggy Whitson, the oldest female spacewalker, her last spacewalk was at the age of 47, and she used to have the highest amount of time spent in space by any NASA astronaut, 665 days, 8th place, but now we have Christina Cook. She is the woman that holds the record for the longest time in space without going back to Earth. So not even adding up all of the missions that she has done in space, just this one. She was up in space from March 14th, 2019 through February 6th, 2020, 328 days. So she now holds the record for that. And she and Jessica Meir also did the first female spacewalk, or all-female spacewalk.
Seeing Jessica Meir make not her first steps, but her first float out of the hatch there.
Hello, United States.
congratulations, Christina and Jessica, on this historic event. What you do is really something very special. So first the moon, and then we go to Mars.
For us, it's just coming out here and doing our job today. We were the crew that was tasked with this assignment. At the same time, we recognize that it is a historic achievement, and we do, of course, want to give credit to all of those that came before us. There's been a long line of female scientists, explorers, engineers, and astronauts, and we have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today. Go women!
And it just so happens that we have the right people doing the right job at the right time. And in fact, this is historic because those two right people are women.
It's been 100 years that we've had the right to vote this year. So this year, while we celebrate that, we also check another box, women doing spacewalk. And the next one, the big one, is for us to walk on the moon.
This is a milestone. It symbolizes exploration by all that dare to dream and work hard to achieve that dream. We hope an inspiration to all future explorers.
The next batch of astronauts are for the Artemis mission, hopefully going to the moon and then on to Mars. And you can see that there are a lot of women, also a lot more diversity just in general in this particular group of astronauts. And they may be on the moon as soon as 2024. If you want to learn about some of the things that I was talking about, these are some of the books that I used. Rise of the Rocket Girls is all about the women who were at JPL. Galaxy Girls, the Mercury 13, and Almost Astronauts is also about the Mercury 13. All right. Eli, was there any questions?
Nope, nothing yet.
All right. Well, if you do have any questions, now is a great time to put them down in the comments so that we can answer them while we wait and see if any questions come in. I want to let those of you know that we still do have a registration open for our virtual summer camp exploring alien worlds. That will stay open through 10 p.m. on Friday. We do still have some spots left. We are going to be basically exploring the universe, looking at how we find planets around other stars, what it takes to survive there, and be making a lot of fun things along the way. All campers will get a box with all of the materials that they need to complete all of the activities we do every day. Some of these activities are building your own rocket that can launch using some cool chemical reactions, completely safe, non-harmless, and then building a pinhole projector to safely view the sun, building a rover that's powered by rubber bands. So there's a lot of really fun stuff, and you can find the link to more information and to register in the description for the video. All right. Well, I am not seeing any questions. So thank you, Lindsay. Fabulous job. I love this show. And I know you said that, again, you found even more to add.
Yeah. Yep.
I think Lindsay has found someone new every time we've given this,
There's
which
a lot
is
of people out there, and it's just sad that their voices ended up getting lost when history got written.
But that is one of the many reasons we like to do these shows. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Coming up over the next week on Saturday, we are doing another edition of Ask an Astronomer. So you can ask us your burning questions and we can hopefully give you answers. Next week on Wednesday, we are doing a tour of the solar system. And then on next Saturday, we are going to delve into the world of, or into the realm of zodiac constellations and kind of tell you what they actually are, some of the stories behind some of the zodiac signs, but really look at the meaning, the scientific meaning behind them, and kind of how they have changed over time. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. So yeah, thanks everyone again. If you would like to see any videos or any of our past streams, you can find them on our YouTube channel or in the videos section of our Facebook page. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and hope to see you again later. So bye everyone.